welcome everyone tonight. We have three speakers tonight, starting with Professor Jean Hayes-Smith, who's going to talk to us about smart use, safe practice, and GenAI for busy clinicians. Then moving on to Dr Rachelle Martin, another teacher at the Research RTRU, on co-producing housing policy and practice with disabled people. Kia ora, Rachelle, and thank you. And finally, Dr Hem Devan, sharing with us tonight on art and action, how creative approaches shape health and well-being. So with no further ado, I'll pass over to you, Jean.
And Fee is going to give me the thumbs up that she is seeing that screen. Yes. So kia ora koutou. Welcome everybody. Now to those I haven't met, I'm Tangata Tiriti. I grew up in the Kaipara, I live in Motueka, I trained as a physiotherapist, and I now teach and research for a tākau whakaihu waka ki Pōneke called Jean Hayes-Smith tōko ingoa. Now, in the last year, I've used generative artificial intelligence, or GenAI, on an almost daily basis at work, and I don't trust it. And that's the point of tonight, to talk about smart use and safe practice. The university hotly debates the use of GenAI. For instance, is any use of GenAI cheating? And does it decrease learning? I'm also an interprofessional supervisor, and GenAI is hotly debated there too. For instance, could I use a GenAI note taker in supervision, and how does the supervisee feel about that? Where does that conversation go? Where's it stored? Is GenAI taking that information and sharing it with somebody else? I wonder what you're asking. Can I use GenAI for patient letters, multidisciplinary team meeting notes, illustrating my exercise handouts, writing the in-service education presentation I'm giving next week? So I feel I've got three responsibilities tonight as we grapple with these sorts of questions. So first, I'm going to stick to principles for decision making rather than give specifics. And that's because everything about GenAI is changing, and it's changing really fast. Second, I'm not going to oversell or persuade you to use GenAI. That is not my intention. And third, I'm making it clear I'm not an expert. This image, which I generated using AI, represents my feelings of being a techno dinosaur. I do use GenAI at work, and my two main questions are always, is this a smart thing to use it for? And is it as safe as it needs to be for this use? Now, tonight, I'll give a quick overview of how GenAI works. And I'm doing that because I think it helps us understand where some of our concerns about it come from, and how that affects smart and safe use. And based on that, I'll suggest some core principles for making decisions. Now, the two phrases I've highlighted are the source of our concerns about generative AI. We have questions like, what are the implications if the training data for GenAI isn't accurate or complete? And is the output trustworthy? Now, you sit down at your computer, as do I, and we open a bot, meaning the customer-facing part of GenAI. Your bot might be called ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, or one of the many others. And you put in a prompt asking, for example, for top tips for baking great cupcakes, including a recipe, please. Now, GenAI does not understand cooking or how things are supposed to taste. All it does is code the prompt you put in. It codes the same words and word phrases the same way every time it sees them, and it uses a numeric coding system. Now, in the transformation, GenAI works like the neural network works in your brain when we're learning. It's making links between things. And in GenAI, a large language learning model, or an LLM, looks for and makes links between codes. And it's learned that when the code for cake appears, then often codes for baking powder and eggs and milk do too. And the LLM will piece your recipe together using probabilities to predict what codes to link and in what order. And then finally, in the decoding, it comes back to being words that it spits out at you, and you get your recipe. And sometimes you get a really great recipe, and other times you'll get something really odd, like an instruction to bake your cupcakes at 200 degrees Celsius for an hour. And the reason this happens is because GenAI doesn't understand cooking and it doesn't understand taste. It merely predicts based on the data it's trained on. So LLMs are trained on these enormous, huge data sets scraped from all the publicly available digital sources there are, like web pages and books and research papers and social media. And the LLM is not at all interested in the trustworthiness of the data or the source of the data. It doesn't store the data. It's a processor that learns links. And it doesn't go back to the source it got the information from to check the accuracy of the answer it's giving you. The answer is merely words based on those predicted links. Now, because the purpose of GenAI is to give you an answer, it'll give you one, and often a very confident response, but it can be an incomplete confident response, a wrong or biased confident response, a mix of accurate and inaccurate information, and an actual hallucination. So let me give you an example of that. 3 weeks ago, I asked ChatGPT for 10 research papers that were about a specific topic. And I asked for the references for those papers, and it produced 10 wonderful fakes. If only those papers had existed, they would have been perfect for the work that I was trying to do. They sounded real, but when I used our library databases to find them, none of them was. So GenAI is great at tasks, but it's very risky for facts. Now, I gathered some notes together for tonight's presentation based on sources I trusted, and then I used GenAI. I gave it a task, suggest some presentation titles, and I chose one of the ones I liked. I gave it another task, order these ideas, and I mostly followed the suggested order. Gave it another task, summarise these ideas. It was a really good summary. Another one, give me a metaphor for how GenAI works, and I was offered 3, and I liked the recipe one. Another task, create an image, and my prompts gave me this picture. However, the facts came from me. I put in the information I'd already fact-checked, and I checked all the outputs from all those tasks to see if anything was added, and if it was, could I verify the fact from a source that I trusted. So here's principle number 1. Never outsource your thinking. Be the human. Any output you get from AI is a draft. It needs your human common sense and your knowledge, and you're the person accountable for anything you use. Be the expert. Check the facts you put in. Check the accuracy of what comes out. Be an equity champion. Check outputs for racism, ableism, ageism, and other things like that. Ask, who might this output exclude or disadvantage? Remember, if AI is drawing from the internet, it's drawing on a lot of biased data. Make the decisions. If you ask the bot to do something, it will inevitably ask you if it wants you to do something, if it can do something else for you. And it will even suggest what it can do. For instance, you can ask a bot to summarize some notes, and then it will say, it will tempt you, and it will say, would you like me to create a slide, a handout, a letter, and so on. So just pause and consider and decide if that's a smart or a safe use. And say what you've outsourced. If GenAI helped you do something, say what and say how. Principle 2 is that you can improve how you use GenAI. And one of the main ways to do this is to learn what we call prompt engineering, or the ability to write a good prompt. And that's how you get what you want, and it gives you the outputs that you want. So first of all, give a clear instruction. Do you want it to write, rewrite, explain, draft, classify, extract, and so on? Be precise. Perhaps you've got a length of response you want. Limit the context. Is this for a specific audience? Define your output. Do you want an image, a summary, a patient handout? Add limits. You say, if there's no information about X, say there's no information. Tell GenAI if you want it to play a particular role. Perhaps you want it to coach your writing or illustrate something for you. And I'd say start simple and develop a conversation. It's one of the amazing things about GenAI. You can start with a prompt, you get an output, and then you put another prompt in, and it will keep working with what you're asking it to do. So here's an example. Imagine you've written an executive summary of an audit and you want to improve it. Those stacked things on the slide indicate that this is a series of prompts. I put in one after the other. So what clear instructions can you see? Words like summarize, remove, rewrite. What about precision? One sentence, or needs to be for this reading age. Contextualize, who's the report for? And I'm writing for a New Zealand audience. In addition to the executive summary, I also ask for another output, a patient-facing summary. And I've got some limits. If you can't do this, then tell me why not. And another limit I've put in there is add no new words or ideas. In one prompt, I actually assigned a role. I wanted a copy editor. Here's another example. This time I'm starting from scratch and I ask GenAI for the ideas. I'll have to screen the output carefully to make sure that what's suggested is clinically appropriate and meets the health and safety policy of our organisation. You can see it's the same style though, with clear, precise instructions, context specificity, and defining the output that I want. So here's the third principle, which is check your choices. First, know the rules. Use approved tools, follow New Zealand and organisation-specific advice. And I've given some things not to do in red, to think carefully about in orange, and are possibly good uses of GenAI in green. So in the red, don't copy and paste in any identifying information into GenAI. And even think hard before using de-identified information that's about a real person. Maybe a fictitious composite case is more appropriate if you have to give GenAI an example to work from. Don't rely on an output as the basis of a clinical decision. And don't create any official records, such as clinical notes, without verifying that information that a note taker or some other tool has summarised for you. Now in orange, as tangata tiriti, I am not comfortable relying on any output to be culturally appropriate or translated correctly. Tikanga and translation need experts from the community for which they're intended. So another thing is to be careful about uploading anything that might be copyrighted or confidential, and be very wary of having GenAI write things for you. But it's great as a draft writer or as a writing coach. And in the green, GenAI is really good at plain language and probably better than most of us clinicians who find it really hard to leave jargon behind. It's really good at summarising documents. It's great at drafting templates for things, letters, presentations, educational materials. And remember, it's drawing on such a huge repository of data. It's learned from far more examples than you'll ever find. And that's why it's also an excellent place to find ideas. So last words from me. I hope this mnemonic might help a little bit. Start by thinking safety. Check your choices about what you're using, how and why. Always remember you're the human and the expert. Only you can decide if it's sensible and sound output. Refining your prompts will mean you get better information in to get better information out. It takes time to learn that, so stick with it. And monitor for equitable and inclusive outputs. We who use GenAI are responsible for that, or accountable for what we use. And we know GenAI is learning from inaccurate, biased and downright objectionable publicly available digital materials. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the next talks. Ka kite anō.
Kia ora, Jean. Thank you for that very fascinating and gentle step through Gen AI. I know I learnt a lot. And if you have questions or comments you'd like to share with Jean through the rest of tonight's presentation, you're very welcome to do that through the chat function. We won't be having a verbal question and answer time in this presentation, but while the subsequent speakers are presenting, Jean may be able to address your comments. If you might be looking at joining us tonight from your phone, I have put in the chat a link through to our mailing list if you'd like to receive follow-up resources from tonight's presentation, such as recordings and an email with frequently asked questions. I now hand over to our esteemed colleague, Dr. Rachelle Martin, who's going to share with us some of her learnings over the last couple of years around co-producing housing policy. Rachelle, take it away.
Kia ora. Thanks very much, and it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about this topic. This is, as Fee said, an HRC-funded project that I've been really privileged to be able to work on over the last 3 to 4 years. It formally came to an end in June, so relatively recently, and we're still in the midst of sharing findings and disseminating knowledge. And so it's wonderful to be able to present this work to you tonight as well. So I just want to start with a quote. Home is somewhere that feels safe, comfortable, certain, consistent, autonomous, reflective of me and my values and interests, and is enduring enough that I can build a lifestyle from and a community around. Somewhere I could invite others either to visit or more intimately into my life and be well resourced enough to show manaakitanga and to feel safe and secure and proud. Somewhere I would trust I could safely and successfully raise a family. Somewhere I couldn't be asked to leave so someone else could use my home for another purpose. This is a quote from the survey as part of this research, a disabled person sharing their aspirations about what home meant to them. And I'm sure that you can all recognise that desire perhaps within yourself around what you might look for in a home as well. So why is kāinga housing and home so important? Well, we know based on that quote, and we know from literature as well, that housing is more than just a shelter. It's about a place where people can, their identity is nurtured, mana is enhanced, safety and belonging is experienced. And we also know for the general population that unsuitable housing impacts health, well-being, independence, and the ability to participate fully in society and live a life that's meaningful. Disabled people in Aotearoa face really persistent barriers to choice and control, though, when they're trying to find a home that works best for them and their whānau. And so this work came out of 2 sort of coinciding objectives that I'll try and explain quickly. But essentially, as researchers, we were really interested in how we could, about sort of co-designing and then piloting some tools that could help disabled people to articulate their expertise and their experiences in a way that policy planners could understand more easily. Rather than lots of individual stories, it was more collated and synthesized and prioritized. And when we asked disabled people, what is the policy area that you want to talk about as we develop those tools, they said, please can it be kāinga housing and home, and please can it be about choice and control. So I'm really going to focus more on the housing aspect in relation to point number 2, but I'm really also happy to talk about point number 1 ad infinitum if people are interested. This is an overview of the research methods. You can see the 2 objectives in the purple above and below, and the green areas were the sort of the methods, I guess, that we used within the different phases. And the blue circular areas are the areas where we did lots of co-design work. And so I'm not going to go into great detail about the methods, other than to say that really we were co-designing these 2 tools in phase 2 and phase 3, and I'll just briefly cover those so you've got some idea. Before I do that though, who was it that was co-producing knowledge? And this is an introduction to some of the co-production team. We had about 40 people, disabled people, working with us across the 4 years, giving really significant amounts of time. So we did quite a lot of online Zoom meetings using Miro boards and lots of interactive activities. And there were lots of asynchronous activities as well. Some people gave 4 hours, couple of hours, 4 hours across the whole project. On average, people probably gave 40 or 50 hours. And there were some individuals that gave over 100 hours of their time across the project. And we had some funding to help acknowledge the time and the effort that they put in. But I just want to emphasize this was a really significant contribution from the disabled community. In phase one, the co-production team, we called them, we asked them to generate some ideas about what was it that impacted on the ability to have choice and control. And these were the kind of parts of the jigsaw that they talked about or identified at that point, so very early on. So, for instance, they talked about urban planning and building codes and tenancy rights, but they also talked about the importance of knowing what you're entitled to, what the options are, and where things are up to. So, for instance, the disability support announcement made today is aimed at trying to improve transparency and clarity around what people are entitled to, because that's been a really significant factor impacting the choice and control that people have. There was also general things around financial security, having enough money, but also specific funding for housing-related funding entitlements. So you'll see it's quite a broad scope in terms of the things that they felt were important so that they could experience choice and control. So the first tool we tried, we developed and then piloted was this qualitative survey. So it's an online accessible survey. Traditionally, what's happened in policy consultations is that disabled people have been invited to a focus group and they've been presented with some materials and asked, do you agree with it or disagree with it? So this was quite a different way of trying to generate data from disabled people around what are your experiences, what are your expertise. And we worked with a UK startup company called Accessible Surveys, who had designed this online tool specifically with accessibility and inclusion in mind. And we worked alongside them to transform their online tool a little bit because they'd set it up for quantitative data collection and we wanted it to be a qualitative data experience. And so, for instance, in terms of some of the accessible features, we worked with them and they inputted a voice memo function. So someone could just press a button and speak their responses within the survey. And it was captured as an audio file that was then transcribed for us, and we could access both the audio file and the transcription. We also included lots of videos and tried to change the vibe of it so it was much more engaging and a warm space. The other tool we tried was a co-produced realist literature review, which was essentially, rather than the researchers essentially doing the literature review, it was more the disabled people. So they were the ones that were engaging with the literature and we were just providing momentum as we went along. And so, for instance, we chose randomly sampled this 22 of the included articles. We also had disabled people helping us with screening decisions. But these 22 articles and reports, they were then able to engage with over time. And you can see there's, some of the articles were 4 pages and some were 292 pages. So it was pretty overwhelming at times. And we actually used generative AI to support accessibility. So we asked generative AI to generate easier to understand summaries or narratives that might explain things. We showed people the tools so that they could have a discussion about a specific article to try and understand what was happening a little bit more. But they were focused on asking, what was tried, why did it work, who did it work best for, what were the key factors that impacted on its effectiveness. And then if something like this was tried in New Zealand, how would that be? So they were bringing their experiences and their expertise to make sense of the literature. So just keep moving along so that we can get through this. But essentially, we framed the housing outcomes around sort of understanding that it's a complex system, but that all of us as individuals and or organisations have some ability to have some influence or exert some control over some aspects of the system. This is a much more empowering place to be than where the disabled people started, which was it's all the government's fault and we just need more money, which is very disempowering. And so framing recommendations and then the disseminating the knowledge around these different players within the complex disability housing system was a really important part of the journey and the learning together. So I'm just going to highlight a few housing recommendations as we go along. The first thing is that a home is more than a house, and that policies and practices need to consider them more than just the physical aspects of a building. Now that sounds really obvious, but it's not. And for instance, the draft disability strategy that's just come out at the moment, the housing aspect of it only relates to the physical aspects of a house, of a building. And so we're going to be putting in a submission around broadening that. The other thing is that people's experiences spoke a lot about housing stability and security, because that housing stability allowed them to then adapt their homes to their specific needs. However, they saw home ownership as the only real way to achieve stability, and that's increasingly out of reach for many people. So what would it look like to create policies and practices that supported housing stability, security, and flexible use options within rental properties, both private rentals, but also community housing providers, social housing? We also need to develop policy and practice that addresses how people change and live and adapt over time. At the moment, policies are very much point in time. So there's in this moment, this is what you need. And this is particularly true for those who are not funded on ACC funded, aren't able to access ACC funding. And so there's a need for us to rethink about how housing policy and practice can adapt and change in response to changing lives, changing health conditions, aging, and changing makeup of whānau. Mandatory inclusion of universal design was absolutely key. At the moment, it's available in public buildings, but not in any private buildings. And if you've got a very limited pool of accessible houses, it's immediately going to impact on your ability to where you live. Just have a look at high density housing around transport hubs, and you see that there's very increasingly difficult to find housing, affordable housing, close to transport hubs, which is what disabled people need, because the homes are dual level, inaccessible often. I've mentioned about the importance of interactions, and this is absolutely important. It's very distressing to hear people working in government agencies and organisations that are supposed to be supporting choice and control, but through the way that they interact, the lack of choice that people are given, the withholding of information, etc., really impacts on people's choices. So how we relate to disabled people when they're making choices around home is really important as well. And that feeds into attitudes and assumptions, societal attitudes and assumptions. What do we expect of disabled people? Do we expect that they'll be able to live independently? What are their assumptions around what does a good life look like in terms of how I want to live? And so if society's attitudes and the public mindset is that there's only this limited options should be available, then disabled people will never experience choice and control around housing. So I guess the challenge I want to leave with you today is, in your life, in your practice, in your interactions, what's one thing you could potentially do to control or influence the disability housing system? Could you tell a story? Could you share a story to change a perception? Could you advocate to a local government? Could you use your local election vote to make your voice known around what the things that you want to make changes to? And if you want some more ideas, there are some resources that can help you with that. And so on our website, which you can see the link there, and I've got another link to it further on. You can download a copy of the visual survey report. There's also a Word version of it to see what people said within the surveys. And we're also developing some advocacy prompt templates aimed at different parts of that stakeholder of the complex housing system. We're going to do some short videos overviewing the recommendations. We've developed a policy evidence summary which goes through those recommendations and others in much more detail, which you can use as a checklist. And we will be obviously publishing more. We've done quite a lot of conference presentations which we'll also share. So there's lots of resources that you'll be able to access now and in an ongoing way. So there's lots of information on the website. Feel free to contact me. But I just want to finish with this. What do you hope for? This is what people shared within the survey. I want a large whare with many rooms so whānau can come and go as needed. I want to buy my own home that's accessible according to my disability needs. I've got all sorts of ideas about intentional communities, but the main thing is tenure, that a person knows that their home is permanent. A house that has had modifications under universal design should be seen as an asset to the community. I'd like universal standards for buildings to be mandatory, and I'd love for there to be an incentive for landlords to provide houses that are disability accessible. Those are some of the things that disabled people said they really hoped for, and wouldn't it be fantastic if we could all support them with some of our little actions this week and over the coming weeks. Thanks.
Oh, kia ora, Rachelle. Super informative and throwing some challenges out to us there too. Thank you for that. And yeah, great to see that a huge piece of work that you've done over the last few years coming to fruition. I hand over now to our final speaker for the evening, Dr Devan, who's going to share with us how creative approaches shape health and well-being. Kia ora, Hem.
Kia ora, thank you, Fee. Kia ora whānau, lucky last after those amazing talks by Jean and Rachelle. Yeah, we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into how creative approaches shape health and well-being. And I'm going to place this talk based on my lived experience as a pain management sort of researcher and in the clinic as a pain management physio. So yeah, before I share this next slide, I just want to sort of apologize if I cause any moral injury by sharing this image. So hopefully I don't hurt anyone's feelings because this is an image, or you can call it a drawing. We did this as part of the whakawhanaungatunga exercise in our pain management service clinic, Matariki Day. This is actually a drawing illustrating my day at pain clinic here in Wellington. So if I know you are struggling with what I've done. This is exactly what my 7-year-old daughter have said. So this is actually the room where the multidisciplinary team assessment is happening. So you can see on this side of the table, there are 3 professionals sitting there. That includes me in the middle. And then on the other side, you can see the patient and their whānau, like support person. Usually the room has a code number that to come in. Even though I've worked there, this is my 5th year, I still don't know the code. So that's what's the code for that room to get in. Sometimes we have the sun inside the room, but I thought this is imaginary, so I had the sun and some indoor plants in there. So anyway, so this is the lived experience of myself working as a clinician in a tertiary pain service. So I know, it's again, it's not an assessment of my drawing ability, but it gives you an understanding an insight of my lived experience as a clinician. So, in the next set of 15 minutes, or maybe 12 minutes, we'll go a bit of share my sort of three key learnings of working as an art-based researcher or a clinician, and finishing off with some reflections overall. So, as we start, the art-based sort of health research is the sort of the example, the definition I quite like is it combines any sort of art form in generating and making sense of, as well as disseminating knowledge. What I quite like about this definition is not only the process of the art-based research or production, but also the outcome. So in this case, it's both the process and the outcome is quite meaningful from both a research and practice perspective. So what are these common sort of methods or approaches it can be usually classified as visual, performative, or literary. As you can see, there are a variety of ways and variety of methods and approaches, and often people use a mixed sort of approach. And again, each has its own sort of advantages. And again, it gives a lot of choice from a participant or a patient perspective. So anyway, my journey in terms of the first key learning started 2022, right after the COVID sort of journey. So what happened was, I don't know, it could be luck or yeah, our chance. This was a workshop that was organized by Science Media Center, and what they've done is they've selected 10 or 12 scientists from across the Aotearoa, and they paired with 12 sort of illustrators from across the Aotearoa. And the whole workshop was led by Dr. Susie Wiles and Toby Morris. I'm sure you may remember their sort of amazing science communication that they've done around the COVID times. So anyway, so the idea is, as a scientist, you bring your idea and you communicate that with your illustrators. And we had like speed dating with 3 or 4 illustrators, and it was so inspiring. And I think that's where this whole journey started. And this was at the time I was doing this research in collaboration with Kokiri Marae here in Lower Hutt, Wellington. And this was a tohu, like an image that was gifted to us as part of the research project. So Nata means snail. Nata is used as rongua, a Maori traditional treatment for treating respiratory illnesses. So the way we used Nata for our research was that pain can make the person in the whānau to go within their shell, but the idea is to help the whānau to come out of their shell and still live well with pain. And it also symbolizes how pain can influence and impact on other aspects of well-being. Anyway, so we had this sort of research ongoing, and that's when this drawing science workshop happened. And through the connections established with Izzy, she's an amazing artist and illustrator. So she actually helped to develop this idea of Nata. And as you can see, the pain can make the person to go within their shell, but the idea of the program was to help them to come out and still move in the direction where they want to go. And even though the pain still remains, the shell remains. So it's completely resonates with the sort of the ethos of pain management, because pain may not go away, but it's more the person being in control rather than the pain being in control. Anyway, so the way we started to use this was to use it as a bit of a reflective sheet, like asked participants to write some of the things that make them to go within their shell as barriers to their pain management, and also asked people to write some of the things that are enablers to their pain management. So this was actually part of the whānau focused pain management program we ran in the community. You can read more about it in the paper that I have there. And this is a bit of a summary of what some of the participants in the program had shared. Like, they wrote a lot of things in their shell part as barriers, the whakama, being in pain, the isolation, the historical and helpful experiences. And they also wrote a lot of things in the snail part. And it acted as a sort of a self-reflective, strengths-based sort of an outcome measure. And if you know of any other strengths-based outcome measure, I would love to know about it. Thank you. So that was the sort of the first learning. The second learning, now that the connection we had already from the workshop, this was the second sort of experience that happened was I'm sure people may know this concept of pacing, which is definitely as something that we talk about in the chronic pain context. Like people often, like when pain is manageable, they do a lot and then they crash and then they do again. When the pain is better and then they crash. So what we encourage is the sort of a bit of the activity consistency, and it is one of the strategies, and it doesn't work for everyone. It is a multidimensional construct in a chronic pain context. So we worked with another artist, Sarah. So she's a different type of artist slash illustrator. We had a lot of meetings with the clinical team and Sarah came up with these ideas of explaining this construct in a different way. As you can see, the weaving as a metaphor, as an example, looks quite different for different people. So I'm definitely not a weaver, but patients could resonate to it, and each of the strand looks differently for different people. And she came up with this another idea as well. This is called unfurling. And again, as you can see, this person sort of burdened by pain and not being able to do the things they enjoy and value on the left. And then once they start to get back to those things, the confidence grows slowly. And then again, it's not linear. They can stop and they can get support from other people, not only two-leg people, but other fairy friends. And as you can see, like as in the far end, the pain is still there, but their relationship with pain has changed and their confidence to engage in valued activities have changed. Again, people resonate to this concept more than, me showing this graph of pacing and, doing consistency and all that. So again, that's another key learning for me. Again, talking about this clinical context, I was sort of, at this stage, I was getting more sort of confident with art and drawing, not myself personally, but more engaging with the literature and working with artists. So I was looking at this sort of the pain drawings and the impact of pain drawings. So I thought perhaps we could try that in the group we run at the hospital. So this is an example here. We asked people on the first day of that first session of the 12-week program to draw their self in relation to their pain. And this is an example of a patient who drew this picture of pain being burdened. And in the last session, like 12th week of the program, we asked the same question. We asked them to draw it. And we did say it's not an artistic taste. It's just a way of expressing differently. And you can see that this is the same person, but you can see there are the way that they were able to express their life now in relation to their pain. I'll show another example. Like this is another person. You can see she's got like multiple pain everywhere. This was her first sort of draw yourself in relation to pain. And then in the last sort of week, as you can see, she's actually a hairdresser. And those two flowers were their two kids. And you can see the sun, you can see the greenery, you can see like somebody has zoomed out and you can see a lot of life. And again, I think it's not only a reflection of how much they have, changed from the program, but also it's also a self-reflective tool for them to see, to compare and contrast from how they have been. So I thought it was very powerful. I might be biased. I am biased. So anyway, I think I have 120 seconds left. So this is my last sort of lesson, which is the sort of the ongoing journey where this time we are using another art-based method called digital storytelling. So we're working with Marifana with chronic pain who have come off opioids, and we're gonna use this as a clinical conversation tool. So this is an ongoing HRC funded project. Again, very lucky to work with participants as a group-based process, helping them to come up with their own story and they record their own short digital story. So because it's a Western method, we culturally adapted it to Aotearoa context based on these tikanga principles, as you can see. And this is some of the participants and researchers' experiences from participating in this group-based storytelling sort of workshops. And as you can see, it's quite a healing experience. It's such a release experience. It's so powerful. It was done and we held the workshops in MRI. So it was quite a healing journey for participants because most of these stories were quite emotional and sometimes traumatic, but doing it in a group context with all the tikanga enabled that it is a safe process. So here's an example. We had Izzy as part of this research team. So along with each digital story, Izzy and Kate, sister, they drew an illustration to go along with the story. And we actually framed the illustration and gifted it back to the participants because they have gifted their story as a taonga. So I felt like it is quite irreplaceable, but this I thought was one way of acknowledging their mana. So anyway, so we have created this website and an intervention, which is currently in the process of piloting and getting tested, Wakahawara. So I'll tell you more about in Hot Topics 2026. So anyway, I think I will sort of finish off here that art-based methods have like it gives more power and democratizes knowledge. And it also gives more responsibility for researchers to make sure, like in terms of ownership and looking after the mana of what is created as part of the research. And again, as a Viro, as a challenge, how does it look like in your practice or from your lived experience context? So with that, I will say ka kite anō. Thank you very much.
That's a wrap from us this year, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and yeah, get in touch or keep in touch. Ka kite anō.
Kia anō.